It's time for Recruiting Better with me, Ben Browning. For ambitious recruiters, it's never been tougher to get seen as a trusted advisor and true partner to your clients and candidates. Join me each week as I address your challenges head on, answering questions from recruitment consultants and business leaders, and introducing experts you can learn from whether you're looking to scale your billings or your business. So if you're looking for inspiration or insights to help you make more placements, win more new business, find more candidates, or simply replace long hours with smart moves, then stay tuned. Recruiting Better has got you covered. Welcome back to another episode of Recruiting Better with me, Ben Browning, and this time I'm joined by Alex Elliott. Alex is Strategic Director at Strive Sales and is heavily involved in all their revenue generating activity for the business. He was formerly co-founder of Liquid Personnel, a business that he sold to private equity in 2016. In 10 years of founding that business, Alex achieved some amazing things with the team. He grew the business to 140 heads and over 101 million in revenue. The business was the 11th fastest growing recruitment business in the UK in 2016 and hit 24th in the Sunday Times Best Companies to work for in the same year. The business was the London Stock Exchange Group's listed in the top 1,000 companies to inspire Britain in 2016 and was the highest ranked recruitment agency in the UK's best places to work for just a couple of years before that. Now, any of you who are familiar with Alex will recognize his excellent content on LinkedIn and the ideas that he shares, and that's why I wanted to get him on the show. I get asked a lot about what it takes to master mindset in the world of recruitment, and Alex has become a bit of an authority on this. I wanted to spend some time discussing with him some of those key points, what it takes to master the mindset of being a great recruiter, and how he's experienced that in his career. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm a bit terrified now. If I'm called the authority on anything, I immediately panic. So I'll certainly do my best, though. But thanks for a very kind intro.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And look, today's show is really all about us just getting some time to talk through some of the great content you shared and some of the great ideas that you hold, which I wholeheartedly agree with in the main. And it'd be really awesome to hear about some of the experiences that led you to build that understanding. And as we go through this, we might also come to a conversation later on in the conversation about stoicism and the role that plays in your world as well. Because again, that's an area that lots of the recruiters I talk to on a regular basis ask me about. But to make this really tactical and to make this really relevant for everybody listening, I was hoping you might start by sharing whether there are any particular examples or experiences where you've seen mindset make a real difference to the way recruiters perform.
So I guess there's two possible examples there, one from my own personal experience and then one maybe slightly broader from a business perspective. But certainly from my personal experience, I think there was a real sliding doors moment for me early on in my recruitment career. So I joined a recruitment company. I was one of 6 new hires. It was, should we say diplomatically, a traditional recruitment business. I'm going to go with that. How's that? That sounds really nice, doesn't it? There wasn't a huge amount of training. There wasn't a huge amount of support. It was very much sink or swim. And I've got to be frank, I did not enjoy my first 6 months at all. It wasn't the nicest environment to learn the recruitment industry, and there were certainly challenges around that. So I ended up being the only one of those 6 who actually made it, which kind of gives you an indication as to the type of environment and the organisation it was back in the day. And I came close to not making it. And I think from a mindset perspective, I think probably what helped me was the ability to be able to control the controllables. So I realized quite early on I was never going to be able to do what some of the more experienced consultants could do from a skill perspective, but certainly the ability to be able to say, okay, well, what can I do to maximize the likelihood of my success? I just worked really, really, really hard, and I left everything possible on my desk every single day with regards to trying to maximize that likelihood of success. I think that was really, really important. And the other thing from a mindset perspective, as well as controlling the controllables, I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And I think it's frustrating sometimes when you see people just give up a little bit too early, because the reality is early on in recruitment, I think it can be really challenging because actually it is quite a complicated job. It takes a while before all of the dots connect. And you can't necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel in your first 3 to 6 months where things start making sense. And I sometimes see people give up a little bit too early just as they're probably about to get there and they have that aha moment. Whereas I guess through my sheer stubbornness, I didn't do that. And that was kind of my sliding doors moment, because again, for me personally, I've had some good successes, I'd like to think, in the recruitment industry. And actually, when I think back to what was that one moment that really made the biggest difference, truthfully, it was that. Because if I'd given up at that point, who knows what I'd have gone on to do and where I would be now. So I guess that's the most personal story I could give with regards to sort of mindset and how relevant it is to your success as a recruiter. But I see it time and time again, a similar thing within a business context. If I had to choose between high skill and high will, I would always go with high will. So I think there's two things that make a recruiter great. If you can get someone who's high skill and high will, of course, that's amazing. And through skill development and L&D, et cetera, it's your job as a manager, a leader, a coach, whatever it might be, to upskill people. But I think I've seen time and time again, if you have someone who's high skill and average will, or someone who's high will and high will and average skill, the high will and average skill person works every single time, because recruitment is such a challenging role. It can be a brutal job, and I don't think people from the outside necessarily realize quite how challenging emotionally a career in recruitment can be. So I think you have to go into it with the right mindset. And I've certainly seen time and time again, from a mindset perspective, it's those individuals who've got the high will who pretty much always overcome someone who might have a higher skill level or a more natural talent, but not necessarily the same character behind them.
Yeah.
There's a rambling, nice long answer for you, Ben. How's that?
I really like it. There's so much there that we can dig into and take apart, and I'd really like to spend some time now to do that. There are three things that really come to mind for me. So in a moment or two, I'm going to ask you a question about where you think that will comes from, particularly, as you say, in a difficult environment, an environment where recruitment can be a very emotional kind of role. And actually, certainly for that first and 6 to 12 months, I think for a lot of people, myself included, and you talked about your experience, that journey of taking the knocks and pushing through is a really big part of it. Typically, when I work with people now, when I coach them, we look at that element of mindset and talk about letting go of the outcome, which might be something that we come back to later as well. But the first question that I wanted to ask is around that 6 months, that 6 months initial experience. And the question that comes to mind is, would you have changed it? You talked about that traditional recruitment business environment, that pressure cooker environment. You mentioned you were one of 6 and none of the others made it. You almost didn't make it by the sounds of things, except for grasping hold of those 2 lessons, control the controllables and taking one step after the other. But would you have had it any differently?
No. Now that I am where I am, I think if you'd asked me that question in the first 6 months, I'd have a different answer for you. But I think, most things in life that are worthwhile tend to be very challenging. And I think that's a consistent, right? So I think studies show that time and time again. It's really fascinating. I know there's been a lot of studies on this where they look at people who've gone through, researchers have spoken to people who've gone through trauma, who've gone through traumatic events, and they've asked that exact question. And look, my comparison here is nothing compared to the type of traumatic events that maybe these individuals have gone through. But I think, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we're talking something like 90% plus of people will respond in the same way that I did and say, no, I wouldn't change it. So I think, it's cheesy, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think it teaches you an awful lot, doesn't it? Having to go through something like that and come through the other end. Although maybe you don't necessarily appreciate that at the time.
Yeah, I hear you. It's really interesting because I had a similar experience, and people have heard me tell that story before, so I won't repeat it. But certainly the first year for me in recruitment was grueling. It was really tough, and I similarly almost didn't make it. But when I coach and train now, particularly those people that are at the early stage of their career, which I do less and less these days, but when I do meet people who are in their first 6 to 12 months, really is about those elements that you mentioned. What can we control? What can I do as a recruiter on a day-to-day basis that will ensure results, ensure outcomes, and also that piece about emotional detachment. And you'll have seen it, and we've talked a little bit about this in the past around resilience and the nature of hard work. And I just wonder whether your view on resilience as it pertains or as it relates to emotional detachment has changed, whether there's anything there around how you coach people or how you kind of encourage people to take those emotional knocks a little bit less hard these days that you've learned through your career.
I think it's really important. First and foremost, before I answer that, the other point I'd add to what you were talking about in your first 6 months in recruitment, how much luck's involved. Like, the reality is, I've seen it time and time again, just because someone gets the first placement doesn't mean they're necessarily doing a better job or working in a better way or working harder than the person who doesn't. So if you go into an environment where the only metric of success is you make a placement in your first month, 3 months, or you're out, I just think that's really like stupid business practice. So just to throw that in there as well. So fortunately, I think we're seeing less and less of that now. I'd like to think that maybe the industry's matured a little bit then and has become a bit more sensible with regards to how it brings people in. The question around resilience, so I think what's really, really important and something that I like to talk about a lot is understanding that failure and success are two sides of the same coin. So you could talk about going through really challenging, tough things to get to the other side. But I think you've also got to embrace the fact that failure leads to success. If you are, use a random example. So when I speak to people who, let's say cold calling, because that's always gets people really emotive, right? Cold calling. If 30% of your cold calls don't go anywhere, does that mean cold calling is ineffective? It doesn't, does it? Because it means 70% of your cold calls do go somewhere. Now, some of them will lead to advancements and maybe a discovery meeting. Others will lead to the possibility of building a relationship or identifying key information that you identified prior to the call. But I think the key point I'm trying to make here is that you've got to understand the statistical reality of success and failure and how those two things are intrinsically combined. So when you have a dropout, you have to accept that a certain percentage of your deals will drop out. So the way that I found it was good for me to be able to mentally process some of that disappointment would be to look at the statistical likelihood of stuff happening and say, I'm going to throw a number out here. Let's say 10% of your deals drop out. If I do 10 deals, one of them is going to drop out. So when that deal does drop out, therefore, it isn't quite as much an emotional, I'm not going to get the same level of emotional response and dejection that I would have done, because I can rationalize it and put some perspective on that and also try and look at it from a statistical perspective. That was really, really helpful for me. So I tried to do that in lots of different ways. And again, that's something that I talk to people about because I think it just helps people look at the reality of what they do on a day-to-day basis and understand how, look, being successful means that 30% of your cold calls you get told to go away. And that's okay because it's that 30% that leads you to the other 70%.
And would I be right in saying that some of the process there, some of the understanding the numbers and allocating those statistics or thinking about that statistical viewpoint plays into the playbooks that you build for the business at Strive that we were talking about previously?
100%. So playbooks are everything for me. So what is a playbook? A playbook is a best practice way to maximize your likelihood of winning. So if you can go into a business where they can have a strong sales playbook, which covers all of the key aspects of sales processes within that organization, and it is effectively a blueprint for success, and it also gives you a clear understanding of the types of things we're talking about, such as probabilities. Again, it just gives you such a... If you're expected to make 100 cold calls a day, that's like, and we don't do that, by the way. That's a bad example, right? But if you're expected to make 100 cold calls a day, and you don't have any understanding of where those 100 cold calls might lead, I think that becomes immediately really demotivating. If you're asked to do 100 cold calls, and again, that's just a random example because I think that number would be far too high. But if you were asked to do 100 cold calls, but you knew that your reach rate would be 15%, that means you were going to connect on 15 of those calls, typically from a medium perspective. And that 15 of those calls, you'd like to think that 50% of them are going to turn into advancements. So a potential discovery meeting, or here are the other key things that you're looking for an objective on those calls. All of a sudden, for me, that gamifies what you do. It gives you such a different perspective on the process you're going through. And it just gives you some visibility as to what the future looks like. So that when you're being rejected and when 85% of your cold calls don't lead to a connection, you can use that information or that knowledge, again, just to empower you in what you're doing and act as a really motivating force. And look, one day you might make 100 phone cold calls and you don't get through to anyone. But if you understand statistics, the reality is that's going to even out. So hopefully the following day, you might get through to 30% of people instead of 15% of people. So again, I just think it gives you an ability to be able to look into the future a little bit, which again gives you some reassurance that you're doing the right things and that that's going to energize you, and that energy is your motivation.
Yeah, I hear that so much. And look, most people listening will know that a big part of what I do these days is create playbooks with businesses. And one of the things that comes out of that is actually tied back to your original point around kind of doing the work and putting the effort in and taking one step after another, which is, in order for the statistics to work, in order for the odds to fall in your favor, you have to do the volume, right? So there's two parts to that. The first thing is you have to do the volume in order to start making the statistics better, improving your ratios over time. But the other thing is, if you do 10 cold calls, there's not enough data there for you to guarantee that 1.5 of them are going to, the 15% are going to end up in advancements, as you say. So there, or even connect, I should say. So there is this real imperative that you put enough volume or enough activity into the system before the playbook even has its, even comes to fruition. I think that really kind of rises in both the points.
It's volume and quality, isn't it? And I put something out recently on KPIs, and I got the usual sort of response because I think people look at KPIs in a bit of a binary way because they just see volume. It's not that. You're managing a sales funnel. You've got volume and then you've got conversion rates. But as you say, if you don't have a high enough volume, your conversion rates won't be there because it's the law of large numbers. So the law of large numbers is the higher the number, the more statistically you're going to work out at the average. So as you say, 10 calls, it's highly unlikely you're going to get your average 15% reach rate. Out of 1,000 calls, it's very, very likely you're going to be within a few percent or two of that average number. So you've got to work the numbers, but you've also got to make sure that the quality is good enough to be able to then convert your way through the sales funnel as you go through each stage.
Yeah, I hear you.
I think all that stuff is just motivational, isn't it? It's motivate. Well, we talk about motivational rocket fuel, but what like the thing I've always said is, in my dream scenario, I would like to be able to bring a really smart, driven individual off the street, hand them a playbook and say, do this and you will be successful. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, right? But that's my dream scenario, because if your playbook is good enough, you should actually theoretically be able to do that because it's a blueprint for success. And in those early days, I found like my first 6 months in recruitment was just horrible because I didn't know what to do to be successful. So it was a case of sheer stubbornness and just keep going, just do the volume, just work really, really hard, trying to figure out what I'm doing quickly enough that I don't get sacked, and hopefully get lucky enough that I make a placement quickly enough. Whereas if you bring someone into the business and you say, here is your blueprint for success, personally, I don't think there's there's nothing more motivating than knowing if I do A, B, C, D, E, F, G to these standards and keep practicing and getting better in these particular areas, this is what that's going to look like and this is where it takes me. I think that's really exciting. And it's why I get so frustrated with DIY. You will never meet anyone who's broken as many pieces of DIY equipment as me because I don't know what I'm doing. So I find it so demotivating that I smash things up. So there we go. There's my personal example of why it's so important to give someone a playbook for success. Whereas, yeah, I can't read instruction manuals and I just have a temper tantrum and smash stuff.
I love it. I love it. And you know what, Alex? Actually, I was speaking to somebody the other day, and they said to me, their example is that, and they were telling me about their approach to BD. Hope they're listening. They said that their approach to BD is a bit like a group of 7-year-olds playing football, right? Because they're all just chasing the ball to one end of the pitch and one side of the pitch, and they're all just following each other around. And actually, there is no strategy, there is no game plan, right? And I have a really difficult question that I need to ask you now, and we can cut this from the show if you don't have an answer, or if you don't, if you don't like the answer you give, it will just.
Well, make something up, Ben. Hit me.
Yeah, but right. So why do you think perhaps so few recruiters have that playbook, that plan, that outline of here's what we want you to achieve, and here are the steps that you need to go through in order to achieve it?
I think the simple answer is the most obvious one there. That's like, it's really, really hard to do. How hard is it? Because I know from experience, I'm an experienced recruiter. I was good at recruitment, and I've built a successful recruitment company from nothing to a good size. It's really difficult to put together a good sales playbook. I think that's the most simple, obvious answer, because I find it difficult. So I've helped the guys at Strive. I went into that market. I knew nothing about that market. So I had to have that beginner's mindset and just learn everything from scratch. And the reality was, it took a long time for us to be able to put something together which was repeatable, predictable, which gave us repeatable, predictable, and scalable results, which is what you're looking for, I think, when you're building that type of playbook. So, yeah, I think the simplest answer is it's damn hard to do.
Yeah, I hear that. Good. Okay, so let me ask you another question that brings us back to mindset then. The next question I want to ask you, Alex, is whether you hold any particular ideas or uncommon opinions that you think have really been borne out in the way that recruiters perceive their work, or the way that you think about recruitment.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think I'm going to answer the question maybe how I want to answer it rather than how you've asked me there, Ben, if that's all right. So I think one of the things that I see, which maybe is a challenge for the industry, and I think as a whole maybe we could get better at, I think recruitment is one of those odd careers that lots of people think they'd be good at. So it's like that typical thing. If you ask a data sample of people if they're above average at driving, 80% of them or something say yes, they're above average, which obviously is statistically not correct. I think recruitment's one of those things. Everyone thinks recruitment's easy because they don't have a genuine understanding of what it takes to be successful. And I think, therefore, we aren't as strict or as disciplined or as technically competent as we could be at ensuring the right people are coming into the industry. Because the reality is, it's a really, really tough job. And I think from my perspective, going back to what we were talking about earlier, you need lots of skills to be good at recruitment, and you need also lots of wills to be good at recruitment. So the types of things that we look for at Strive, conscientiousness, competitiveness, coachability, drive, grit. On the intelligence side, we look for a certain level of GIA, right? You've got to be smart to work in our business because you've got to be able to crystallize information and process information really, really quickly. And we've identified that by, doing regression analysis with regards to what our best recruiters do compared to some of the ones that haven't been successful. So I think we have really, really high barriers to entry. I think the challenge a lot in recruitment is there's really, really high churn, because I think a lot of recruitment companies, sometimes it's that we'll give them a shot mentality. And I don't think they necessarily do a good enough job of making sure they're taking on the right people in the first place, who have the right characteristics and the right traits which are going to maximize the likelihood of them lasting their first year or two. And then on top of that, of course, there's the support and the L&D structure that you have to give people the playbooks and stuff to give them that platform to be successful. But again, I'm kind of answering the question in my own little way, because it's almost like what people from outside of recruitment look in and they think, and then I think we double down on that by actually giving the wrong people the opportunity when it's just not suited to them. So I think as an industry, we could be a lot tougher, or we could be a lot more disciplined in being selective about making good hiring decisions in the first place. And I think that would reduce churn. I think it would improve service levels. And I think it would have a really, really positive impact upon the industry as a whole. Just because you're good at talking, just because you're bubbly and an extrovert, please do not think that that makes you suitable for a career in recruitment, because it doesn't. Those things, in fact, are not leading indicators as to whether you're going to be successful or not. But I think that's how we interview people. It's the halo and horns thing. Oh, I really like this person. They're really bubbly. I've bought into their personality. They seem good fun. They've got good chats. They say they're motivated and they want to earn some money. So, yeah, I'm not really answering your question, but maybe that's kind of something that I feel quite strongly about, that we could definitely be tougher around that and better at it.
Standing out in your sector is becoming harder than ever. Lots of people are making noise, saturating the market with the same old droll tones. So if you want to stand out, it's time to start a podcast. Yes, there's loads of podcasts out there, but how many of them are actually in your niche? Do any of them speak to your perspective on the market? I didn't think so. Podcasting not only sets you apart as an innovative thinker in your market, it is great content for repurposing. Here at SearchStat, we help you become the voice of your industry. We can stretch your content and turn it into a content goldmine, leveling up your personal brands and recruitment marketing in the process. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, to find out more, head over to searchstat.co.uk/podcasts.
And I think some of that comes back to what we've already talked about, right? In terms of being able to follow the process, being able to detach emotionally, being able to focus on the kind of the process steps rather than the results, and also thinking about things from a slightly wider, perhaps even more analytical perspective. So you're thinking about the statistics, you're thinking about the numbers, you're thinking about the likelihood, rather than simply thinking about the outcomes. I do wonder, as you say, whether there is something that all recruitment businesses or a lot of recruitment leaders could be doing to set a higher bar, set a different set of standards that really align to what makes a great recruiter. And everyone's in search of that answer, an answer to that question: what makes recruiters great? And look, given your experience, it'd be remiss of me not to flip that one back to you. You talk about the playbooks you've run, you look at the regression analysis that you've done in the businesses that you've been involved in. I'm interested, other than those things that you mentioned, other than kind of grit and the GIA, the general intelligence kind of score, what else has come up? Has there been anything else that's come up that's been a key feature of those that have gone on to be really successful in your businesses?
But before I answer that, I'd again highlight what we were talking about earlier, which is it's not an exact science. And let's say hypothetically you could get 90% of your hiring decisions right, which would be nirvana, right? I don't think anyone could ever do that, by the way. That would still mean that 1 in 10 people that you hired, you got wrong. So I think first and foremost, you have to again understand the two sides of that success and failure coin. You've got to understand that regardless of how thorough and robust and scientific your hiring methods are, you are still going to get it wrong sometimes, and that's okay, because it's not an exact science. So now that I've qualified that, I think you've then got to say, okay, well, what is the percentage of people that we would always like to get right? And I think that sets a high barrier to make sure that you're not just making you're being as thoughtful as possible with regards to your hiring decisions, because it's such a critical thing, and the consequences of getting it wrong can be, are really bad. So I think that's important. The things that we look for at Strive, I kind of touched on those earlier: drive, grit, conscientiousness, coachability, and competitiveness. So in our particular environment, we've identified those things are leading indicators of success. Do individuals have to be exceptional at every single one? No, but I think people do have to have some super strengths. So again, you don't want someone to be average at everything. You want them to have some super strengths. So they're the key behavioral drivers that we look for. And we have a really robust and thorough interview process to try and identify those things. And then on the other side, as I say, we look at GIA because smarter people are more successful in our company. You know, that's just proven time and time again. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to be a good recruiter, far from it. But I think you do have to be able to process and crystallize information pretty quickly, which is important and a strong indicator of GIA. And then there's a couple of emotional intelligence attributes which are really important to us as well. So assertiveness in our industry is really, really important. You're dealing with VPs of sales who, for high growth VC-backed tech companies, you're dealing with the VCs themselves. Some of them are real type A personalities. So if you can't resonate or manage a type A personality by having a high enough level of assertiveness, I think you're going to struggle from a communication and a management perspective. So they're the things that we look for, and we're pretty good at keeping that percentage at the top end of the industry, especially when you consider that I think 40% of recruitment consultants have left the industry within their first 12 months. Which again goes back to what I was talking about, which is making sure that you hire really, really slow. And that doesn't mean having a slow process. I don't mean dragging it out over weeks or months. But it does mean making sure that you have like a slow, methodical, really thoughtful process to ensure that you're really analysing and identifying those key drivers before you say yes.
Yeah. Listening to you sharing that reminds me of a lot of the content that I share around how recruiters should engage their clients, right? It's having that conversation where you're pushing back and you're saying, when you say they need to be X, why is that important? Have you ever seen anybody come into your business and be successful without that? Here are a couple of examples of benchmarks of people we've placed who've gone on to be really good and they don't have that. So can we just verify how important that is within your setting? I guess that combines both assertiveness, but also that desire to really help a client understand the very fabric of what they're assessing for when it comes to an interview or a selection process in terms of who they're looking to bring into those roles.
You're demonstrating credibility as well, aren't you? And I think first and foremost, you've got to demonstrate credibility, and then that can lead to trust. I think people get it a bit, recruiters sometimes, they think rapport equals trust. And that's a really horrible thing to do, is to try and over rapport someone into trusting you. I think first and foremost, you have to demonstrate credibility, and you have to get them to respect you as a professional within your sector and industry and an expert at what you do. Once you've demonstrated that credibility, I think at that point you can start to earn their trust that you've got their best interests at heart. At that point, you can start thinking about a bit of rapport. But yeah, I think often people get that the wrong way around.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear you share that, because I've often seen rapport as a little bit of a defense mechanism. You know, it's like, if I build rapport with them, they're less likely to tell me to off, right? And that's a defense mechanism. They may well be less likely to say something you don't want to hear. That doesn't mean that they're more likely to choose you as their only provider, pay you up front, engage in a really collaborative kind of way, and make filling their roles easier, which is surely the goal of anything we do in terms of relationships in recruitment has got to be, does this organization, does this person help you fill their roles?
100%. You've got to go against the stereotype, haven't you? I'll always take a cold call and I'll always be polite, but nothing like puts me off more than that cheesy salesperson who tries to rapport build with me. Get to the point. Why are you calling me? I've just taken a cold call. It's a cold call. Naturally, your body goes into a state of defensiveness, right? You go into fight or flight. So, you have to understand the psychological impact you have on someone when you cold call them. The last thing they then want to hear is someone trying to cheese rapport you down the phone to try and get you to lie to them. It's just like, why are you calling me first and foremost? So yeah, no, I agree.
Mm-hmm. In hearing that, and you mentioned a few of those traits that you look for within the business, one of the things that I'm really interested about, of course, is coachability. right? So I wonder whether there are any ways that you particularly look to assess that, or any particular examples where you've seen coachability or someone's coachability grow as they've kind of worked as you've worked with them or they've worked with you.
Yeah. So the first question around how to test for it, I think there's two things. One, you should do formal role plays. So you describe a scenario, you role play that scenario. I don't think how they do in that role play is particularly important, but you then provide them feedback. How they respond and take in that feedback, I think, is really, really important. You then rerun the role play and see how they actually action the feedback that you provided. And you just keep rinsing and repeating. And I think it becomes really clear. I think you can identify quickly if someone doesn't receive feedback well, as an example. But I think, like most things, I get asked questions around like interviews, like best interview questions and this and that, how to identify stuff. And look, for me, it's all about the CV walkthrough, literally from someone's childhood through to where they are now. I want to deep dive into that individual's life, and I have a structured way of going through each aspect of their, because typically like we're hiring people who are just coming out of university or first jobbers. These are young people who don't have a huge amount of experience. So I think the most important thing is to be able to delve into their background. If they can demonstrate through your questions that they've got demonstrable examples of being coachable, I think that's the best indicator that they're coachable. It's like anything in life. If they've done it before and there's lots of examples there where they've enjoyed being coached and they can demonstrate skill improvement from coaching, I think that's your best indicator. What was the second part of that question? Sorry.
Yeah, second part was whether you've seen anybody come into your organisation that perhaps have grown in their ability to be coachable, and whether you've seen people develop in their ability to be coached.
Oh, I think as a leader, one of your jobs is to be like the most high performance cultures that I've been involved with have been like learning cultures, and I think one of the jobs as a leader is to share knowledge. And I think, like at all cultures, it's driven by the leadership team, right? And I think if the leadership team are really bought into learning and development and getting better, and they've got a growth mindset and they're focused on marginal gains or larger gains and continuous improvement and all that sort of good stuff, I think that seeps down into the organization. And if you share that knowledge and demonstrate that passion for getting better and better and better, I think that's naturally going to rub off on the people that you work with. So 100%, I have seen, I'm like I like learning. I'm a voracious reader. I like, if I don't know the answer to something, I feel quite motivated to go out way and do some research and try and figure stuff out. So I've definitely seen that impact. I've seen a positive impact with that stuff. And then before you know it, you might be sending podcasts, you might be sending extracts from articles, you might be sending a book to someone because you know it's a particular topic that's relevant to them. You start to see within the WhatsApp groups within the business, them doing it with each other. And then I think that's a really powerful way to get people thinking about mastery, because recruitment is quite a monotonous job. And I think you have to be really, really good at going again and again and again. And best practice process is often the same thing over and over and over again. So I think there's a high level of monotony. Therefore, in this industry, it's even more important than others where naturally you're learning new stuff all the time. I think you have to have a focus on mastery within recruitment, because if you're not having that focus on mastery and marginal gains, I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of just doing the same thing over and over and it becoming like basically like drudgery, just doing the same task over and over. So I'm rambling. Yes, I've definitely seen the impact of creating a learning culture led by the people at the top of the business and the managers who drive that culture through the business. And it definitely has a positive impact upon other people in some of the ways I've described.
I love hearing that, Alex. There's a lot there about, as you say, creating the environment for that. So as a leader, really sort of creating the environment where people are encouraged to become more coachable, encouraged to seek out and look for feedback, encouraged to think about the feedback they're getting and adapt their approach. And as we've talked about before, it's great to see recruitment businesses really embed that, and where we can help promote that and do more across the broader industry to encourage that kind of behavior. It's really important and really good work. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I wonder, if there are any particular habits or activities that you've seen that have helped shape your mindset, or any activities or daily activities that you've seen have a big impact on others when it comes to the mindset that they approach work with.
I think learning is obviously the one that we've been talking about a lot there. So I think that's the obvious, the first answer to give. I think just getting into the habit of, I read books and I listen to podcasts. They're my two things. And I just get into the habit when I'm in the gym, I put a podcast on, and that podcast will be something related to where I'm at this moment in time. I think the really cool thing nowadays is there's just information everywhere. When I was growing up, I'm 43 years of age, so I'm not exactly dead yet, but I do remember what it was like pre-internet. And I lived in a world where you didn't have the ability just to go online and just get the answers to questions. I think it's absolutely amazing what we have now. And I think sometimes people don't necessarily appreciate that, who maybe just take it for granted. I think the ability to get yourself into the habit of just regularly making the most of that is massively, massively important. So learning is obviously just a habit that you get into, and it's like training your brain. You just get smarter. Those neural pathways connect, they get bigger. The more you think about something and the more that you proactively research a particular topic, the smarter you get. So I think that's been really helpful. And then I think the other thing is healthy body, healthy mind. So 100%, I've always been extremely intrinsically driven. So I've always had that ability just to keep putting one foot in front of the other. But it's only as I got older that I realized quite how important it was to maintain a healthy lifestyle to go with the that drive. So I think taking time away from work, even for someone like me who's pretty obsessive about my work and stuff, just going outside, just being outside in nature every single day is good for my soul. And the health and exercise piece as well, really, really important to me. If I go a couple of days without exercising, I start to feel it. If I don't have those endorphins, I can really feel the difference mentally and from a mindset perspective. So yeah, I'd combine the learning piece, which is the mental training. I'd combine that with the physical piece, which isn't just running and weights and what have you. It's also just about getting outside and being at one with nature, which for someone like me to say is something I'm getting better at with age.
I hear you. And I talked to, again, it reflects so much in the Recruiting Better community, the consultants that reach out and talk to me about managing their time. We've got recruiters who are working an incredible amount, right? And long weeks and long hours, particularly in really candidate short markets, and really struggling to get jobs filled and get their work done, in a reasonable amount of time. But at the same time, they're really conscious of their other commitments and particularly, as you say, kind of that physical exercise piece that is so important to so many of them. So I think there's always that real challenge around balancing those things. But I always say, look, in order for you to be as effective as you can be at work, you need to have that balance with the stuff that you do outside of work.
You have to recharge. I don't like work-life balance, especially with, this is just me, right, being like a grumpy old man. I don't like that term. Because and especially when you're really early on in your career, if you take a career in recruitment, I know from experience how a career in recruitment, if you join a high growth recruitment business and you work really, really hard, the opportunity and the benefits that you can receive from that are so incredible. I think you have to question whether recruitment's really for you if you're going into recruitment and within your first couple of years you're talking about work-life balance, because I think it's about delayed gratification. What you want to do is give yourself as many opportunities and options later on in life as possible. So personally, I think that means really grasping the opportunity, working incredibly hard early on, and putting your whole putting as much as you can into your career to get that springboard to ongoing success. But the counterbalance to that is you have to recharge. Of course you do. And recruitment is such a relentless, high pace, and emotionally draining role at times. You have to do things outside of work that recharge you. And for me, when I was young, my era, you went to the pub. and you got smashed and you smoked 20 cigarettes and what have you. It's just a terrible lifestyle. And then you wouldn't feel any recharge. Whereas the guys I work with nowadays, one of the guys, he works incredibly hard. On a Friday night, he sent a picture around the WhatsApp group of him in yoga. And I'm just like, this is amazing, because I think that mindset is, I think people are a lot, the youth of today compared to my era, I think they're a lot more mature. And I think they just understand that stuff an awful lot better. And I think they're just a lot more grown up with regards to how they approach recharging. And I think that's going to do them a lot of good in the long run, because I definitely saw people who didn't do that, who burned out really, really quickly because they didn't have that opportunity to recharge, or they didn't take the opportunity to recharge in an appropriate manner.
Yeah, indeed. And I really share that sentiment. Really appreciate that response as well. I think that maturity of the people towards the beginning of their career in the industry now, as you say, for me, sort of similar sort of age and similar kind of duration in the industry, it really has changed. It really has shifted, and it's a great thing to see. So really appreciate those comments. Okay, so I think we've reached the end of our time, right? So we'll do the Stoic piece perhaps at another opportunity. Alex, thanks so much for coming on the show, and thank you for sharing your messages with the Recruiting Better community. Before we bring this episode to a close, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything else that you think we haven't touched upon that's important for recruiters to know right now about mindset, or about anything else in terms of the way they approach their work?
I think, look, you've had me rambling away. I don't even know what I've been saying, Ben. So well done. You've managed to put up with my rambling for nearly an hour. That's like pro you. Look, the mindset for me, there's three things that really, really matter, right? There's your actions, there's your reactions, and it all starts with your mindset. That's the third thing. So I think having a strong mindset is about retaining perspective. I think it's about being completely accountable for your actions and taking ownership of your actions. And then just as importantly as that, I think it's about being really trying to be as dispassionate or as unemotional as possible about your reactions. I think if you can start to control the controllables around that stuff, I think it's something that we all have to practice and get better and better at. But certainly from my experience, when I try and remind myself of those three things, it gives me a good way to be able to look at the broader picture and see whether I'm getting drawn into nonsense or whether I'm actually focusing in on what's really, really important.
Thank you. You've done an excellent job today of really crystallizing what those actions, those reactions, and some of those core mindsets are. As I say, I know that the audience will take a lot from hearing your thoughts on all of this, and just really appreciate you making the time to come on the show and share the message. You're doing great work, and I really appreciate
to you. I love your content, Ben, and thank you for inviting me on. I really enjoy listening or reading your technical content. I think it's very different to a lot of the stuff that's out there. So good stuff.
Excellent, Alex. Thank you so much for those kind words, and thanks for coming on the show.
Nice one. Cheers, Ben.